The Lord declared to the young prophet Nephi, Blessed art thou, Nephi, because of thy faith, for thou hast sought me diligently, with lowliness of heart, and inasmuch as ye shall keep my commandments, ye shall prosper and be led to a land of promise, yea, even a land which I have prepared for you, yea, a land which is choice above all other lands. Welcome to another of my documentaries on the Book of Mormon. In my book, Nephi in the Promised Land, I claim that ancient Peru, the area which today makes up the nations of Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, is the best candidate for the lands of the Book of Mormon. As we start our search for the lands of the great ancient American prophets, let's ask ourselves this question. Why Peru? South America might come as a surprise to some of you, because some Book of Mormon scholars have claimed that Joseph Smith indicated that Zarahemla was located in Mesoamerica. They cite that this claim was published in the church's publication, The Times and Seasons, when Joseph Smith was its editor. In actual fact, Joseph Smith never made such a claim, nor approved of it, and the editor of the Times and Seasons at that time was John Taylor, not Joseph Smith. What we do know is that the prevailing view of the early church leaders, who knew Joseph Smith personally, was that it had been revealed to the prophet that Nephi's ship had landed in Chile. Two highly influential apostles, Elder Orson Pratt and Elder Franklin D. Richards, openly taught that Joseph Smith had received a revelation that Nephi's ship had landed at 30 degrees south latitude in Chile. Now, both of these men knew Joseph Smith, and it goes without saying that apostles themselves are prophets, seers, and revelators, and men who would never teach something that was contrary to what Joseph Smith had taught. Now, evidence supporting this revelation to Joseph Smith is that it was written in the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams, the counselor of the prophet, and it appeared on the same piece of paper as a revelation that now appears in the Doctrine and Covenants. It appears that the early church leaders were so convinced that Nephi's ship had landed in Chile that in 1851 they sent Apostle Parley P. Pratt to Chile to serve a mission, the very place where Nephi's ship would have landed. Now, certainly, no Book of Mormon scholar, however dedicated, knows more about Book of Mormon geography than our modern prophets. From the writings of the prophet Joseph Smith and of other inspired men, it seems all are in agreement that the followers of Lehi came to the western shores of South America, present Harold B. Lee. There is no reason that I know that you should not have remarkable success in that field, which at one time was the central country occupied by the people of the Book of Mormon, President Joseph Fielding Smith, to the missionaries of the Andes South Mission in Peru and Bolivia. Is there physical evidence that the Book of Mormon took place in ancient Peru? To answer this question, we need to carefully study the Book of Mormon's description of the Nephite civilization and the lands that it occupied. Although there are many more indicators, here are 20 defining characteristics, all of which point to the Nephites having built their civilizations in South America. The Jaredites and Nephites made gold plates. Archaeologists in Peru have discovered gold and copper foils dating to 1200 BC. The thin metal plates had been hammered into sheets only 4 to 2 thousandths of an inch in thickness. Recent discoveries in Peru have shown that the people of that land were working gold as early as 1900 BC. In contrast, the earliest evidence of metalwork in Mesoamerica didn't occur until 900 AD, over 1500 years after Nephi made his first gold plates. The people of the Book of Mormon mined gold and silver in abundance, as well as copper and iron. When Pizarro's ships first returned to Spain with their treasure of Peruvian gold, one historian wrote, "This news excited all Spain, because it rang throughout that the house of trade was filled with golden vessels, and jars and other praiseworthy pieces, and of great weight." End quote. Despite the tons of gold and silver the Spanish stole from the Incas, it is believed that most of their treasure was buried or thrown into lakes by the Inca priests to prevent the objects from falling into the hands of the Spaniards. One private collection of Peruvian artifacts contains over 10,000 pre-Columbian gold objects. In antiquity, the Peruvians hardened their gold by mixing it with copper. Archaeologists have recently discovered that the Peruvians were mining iron ore at least 2,000 years ago. In contrast, while iron ore is found in almost every other part of the world, it is not found in Central America. The Jaredites and Nephites worshipped Jesus Christ. Some believe that the white god of Central America, Quetzalcoatl, was the Christ of the Book of Mormon. This is highly unlikely, for Quetzalcoatl did not become a preeminent god of Mesoamerica until 900 AD, nearly a millennium after Christ visited the New World. In contrast, the premier god of the Andes has always been Viracocha, the bearded white god. Since Viracocha dressed in a white robe and wore sandals, the Spanish believed that he must have been Saint Bartholomew. The New World belief in a bearded white god originated in Peru, not Central America. The earliest image of the white god in the Americas is found in Peru and dates back to 2180 BC, the early centuries of the Jaredite Christian civilization. It is also extremely important to realize that for 4,000 years, the Peruvian image of their white god has always been in the form of a normal man. His image has never incorporated beast-like features, such as the feathered serpent god of Mesoamerica, something extremely foreign from the LDS concept of Jesus Christ. The Book of Mormon provides an account of Jesus Christ visiting the New World. The oral tradition of the Peruvians claimed that a bearded white god visited them, taught them how to live and to love one another. The Peruvian white god traveled the country, blessing the people, teaching them, healing their blind and sick, and resurrecting their dead. Many of the icons of the white god in Peru show him with tears, for he wept when he visited the Peruvians. A god who cried? That would seem an odd characteristic of the ancients' concept of a god. However, a God who shed tears for his people is perfectly consistent with the Book of Mormon's account of the visit of Jesus Christ in the New World. A language with Middle Eastern roots. While the written languages of Mesoamerica have been shown to have their origins in Chinese, linguists have found that the language of the Incas of Peru, Quechua, contains specific Semitic language characteristics. A vanished written language. When the Spanish landed in Peru, the Incas told them that their ancient ancestors, like the Spanish, had had a written language, but that it was lost in their distant past. Today, no written documents remain of the Incas. In contrast, hundreds of pre-Columbian written documents still exist in Central America. The loss of the Nephites' written language is predictable. Throughout history,
conquering armies have been ordered to destroy the records, books, maps, and maritime charts of those they have conquered. The Lamanites killed off the entire Nephite political and religious elite, and probably were the ones who destroyed the Nephite written records. The loss of the Nephite written records is the fulfillment of a prophecy by Jacob, the brother of Nephi. He wrote, "We know that the things which we write upon plates must remain, but whatsoever things we write upon anything, save it be upon plates, must perish and vanish away." The people of the Book of Mormon built great cities dating to the 3rd millennium BC. As early as 2700 BC, the Jaredites were building cities in the New World. It would be another 1500 years before the first cities were built in Mesoamerica. In contrast, the earliest civilization in the Americas, with its great pyramids and public buildings, is found just north of Lima, Peru. The civilization was called Caral. The ancient city's temples resemble the Ziggurats of Sumer, the land from which the Jaredites fled. Caral has been dated between 26 and 2700 BC. The Book of Mormon era ended by 400 AD. In Mesoamerica, the Mayan Classic period was between 300 and 900 AD. Its grand cities and temples were built long after Moroni had buried the plates in the hill Cumorah. On the other hand, archaeologists have dated civilizations in Peru that match the dates of the Book of Mormon civilizations, including the city of Nephi, Zarahemla, Bountiful, and the establishment of the Lamanite civilization. The land of the Book of Mormon was divided into quarters. The Book of Mormon lands were divided between the lands northward and the lands southward, and divided again into 4 quarters. The Peruvians did exactly the same thing, a north-south axis through their land, which was subdivided into 4 quarters. In fact, the name the Incas gave to their nation was Tiwantisuyo, which means the land of 4 quarters. The land of the Book of Mormon was covered with borders, meaning mountains. As I explained in my book, Lehi in the Wilderness, the word borders means mountains in Hebrew and Arabic. In describing the Promised Land, the Book of Mormon uses the word borders 61 times. Other terms used to describe the land of the Nephites included, quote, a great mountain, and, quote, an exceedingly high mountain. Such words are indicative of the mighty Andes of Peru. A great network of highways crisscrossed the land. The Nephites were great highway builders. During one short expansion period, quote, many highways were cast up and many roads made, which led from city to city, from land to land, and from place to place. As we see, the Nephites had a vast highway system that interconnected their entire empire. We also know that the Nephites were expert in the use of cement. The Peruvians constructed an incredible highway network that was longer than the Roman road system. Its surface tracks ran for 25,000 miles and was, in its time, the biggest road system in the world. The Nephites distinguished between regular roads and highways. At times, the Inca highways ran at altitudes of over 15,000 feet above sea level. In other sections of the Peruvian roads, the Incas used cement. The Nephites were Hebrews. Some writers have suggested that the Book of Mormon took place in North America, since European DNA has been found among the Indians of that continent. However, the same European DNA has been found in Peru and other areas of South America. Geneticists have traced the European DNA in the Americas to migrations between 24,000 and 16,500 years ago. Regardless of when the European DNA was introduced to the Americas, it had nothing to do with the Nephite bloodlines. Lehi's family were not Europeans. They were Hebrews from the Middle East. It was not until 2008 that Hebrew DNA was found among the native populations in the New World. So far, Hebrew genetic markers have been found in the New World only in South America, including areas that were part of ancient Peru. People of the Book of Mormon were divided into two groups, one fair-skinned and the other darker-skinned. Peruvian oral tradition holds that the first Incas were 4 white-skinned brothers who came to Peru and taught the natives how to live. From these original brothers, 2 nations formed, one fair-skinned and the other darker-skinned. The 2 Peruvian nations, one speaking Quechua and the other speaking the language Aymara, hated each other since the brothers had originally separated from each other. Eventually, the darker-skinned nation killed off the fair-skinned people. The artifacts of ancient Peru often show 2 races with different skin tone. This ceramic from Nesca, Peru, depicts a battle scene where a well-armed fair-skinned warrior battles a nearly naked darker-skinned soldier. The Nephite general Moroni, quote, prepared his people with breastplates and with arm shields, yea, and also shields to defend their heads, and also they were dressed with thick clothing. In the same battle scene, the Book of Mormon tells us that the Lamanites fought, quote, naked, save it were a skin which was girded about their loins. Another ceramic found in the same area depicts lighter and darker skinned figures, and a fair-skinned man with facial hair, a characteristic not found among Native Americans when Columbus arrived. The Nephites were skilled shipbuilders. Like the Jaredites before them, the Nephites knew how to build ships. Archaeologists still ponder a great mystery of the ancient world. How is it that the reed ships of Lake Titicaca in Peru and Bolivia match with exactness the reed boats made by the ancient people of Mesopotamia, the original home of the Jaredites? Hagoth and other Nephites built ships and sailed the waters of the Pacific Ocean. The Peruvians have a long seafaring lore. The Spanish first encountered the Incas when they intercepted a large Inca ship 150 miles out to sea. The Incas, they discovered, were on a trading mission to a distant island in the Pacific. The people of the Book of Mormon had horses and chariots. Although the Book of Mormon refers to horses, it never mentions people riding horses, or for that matter, any other animal. Archaeologists believe that Native American horses died off over 12,000 years ago. So what animal would Nephi have seen for the first time that reminded him of a horse, and thus called it by that name? When the Greeks first saw hippopotamus, they called them horses. When the Romans first encountered elephants, they called them cows. There are dozens of other examples of colonizers calling new species of animals after animals they were familiar with in their homelands. When the Inca first saw the Spanish horses, they thought they were large llamas that were strong enough to carry a man. Undoubtedly, Nephi made the same misclassification, but in reverse. When he saw the llama, he must have thought that it was a small horse, too small to carry a man, but strong enough to carry a pack and to pull a chariot. The Nephites grew many kinds of grain. The land of the Book of Mormon was subject to drought and famine. However, when they were righteous, they grew in abundance corn, wheat, barley, needs, and shechem. Some of these crops had Old World counterparts, such as barley, but they also grew crops that were native only to the New World, such as corn. But what were needs and shechem? One might have been potatoes, which originated in Peru. The other might have been quinoa, a grain that grows only in the high altitudes of the Andes and has the highest protein content of any grain. The Jaredites and Nephites were shepherds. While the Book of Mormon is not a record of the Nephites' economic affairs, it mentions sheep 24 times, flocks 63 times, and shepherding 17 times. This fact alone eliminates Central and North America as candidates for the land of the Book of Mormon. The only domesticated animals the Olmecs, Toltecs, Mayans, and Aztecs had were turkeys and dogs. The Spanish believed that the Peruvian alpaca was a kind of sheep. It only makes sense that Nephi would have believed the same thing. When the first conquistadors entered Peru, they saw great herds of alpaca, which were bred for their fine fleece. Another Spanish chronicler, Cilla de Leon, described the alpacas as rams, sheep, and lambs, and wrote, quote, eating those good rams that they found there, which were extraordinary and more flavorable than the excellent ones of Spain, end quote. The Book of Mormon reminds us that the Nephites sacrificed the firstlings of their flocks. The Incas used only their spotless llamas and alpacas as sacrifices to their white god. The Spanish historian Betanzos wrote of the Incas, quote, the lords of Cusco made many great sacrifices of a large amount of livestock. In sheep and lambs was sacrificed. When the Spanish reached Peru's Altiplano, they found that one man alone had a herd of over 40,000 alpacas. If the alpaca was the sheep of the Book of Mormon, then its wild cousin, the pecunia, was probably the animal Nephi called a wild goat. Elephants, pigs, and cattle are mentioned in the Book of Mormon. There is a straightforward explanation for the elephants in the Book of Mormon. At the time Lehi left Jerusalem, Greek was a prevailing culture in the Mediterranean region. The animal species we call elephants today were not known in that region until Hannibal of Carthage, centuries after Lehi left Jerusalem. Prior to the arrival of the elephant, the Greeks called any animal with tusk an elephant. For example, they called the boar an elephant. It would only make sense then that Nephi would have used the names elephant and pig for the South American peccary. Likewise, when Joseph Smith translated the gold plates, he used the word cattle. So what did the prophet mean by cattle when he used the word during his translation? The Noah Webster's 1828 American Dictionary defines cattle as, quote, in its primary sense, the word includes camels, horses, asses, all the variety of domesticated horned beasts of the bovine genus, sheep of all kinds, and goats. Clearly, the meaning of the word cattle in 1828 would have included the domesticated animals of the ancient Peruvians. The Nephites had both solar and lunar calendars. Like the Nephites, the ancient Peruvians used a lunar and a solar calendar. While the Mayans were noted for their solar calendar, the Peruvians were the first New World civilization that used a solar calendar. The Nephites kept large stores of food and other provisions. When the Spanish discovered Peru, they were amazed to find that the Incas had thousands of granaries. In fact, the Incas had an 11-year supply of food storage and other provisions. Even more surprising, the Incas told them that their white god taught them to store food and how to preserve it. In Book of Mormon times, the Gladianton robbers could not defeat the Nephite nation, quote, because of their much provisions which they had laid up in store. Costly apparel. The Jaredites produced silk and fine linen, while the Nephites were chastised for wearing costly apparel. Certainly, The Book of Mormon usage of the word silk did not refer to the cloth made from the thread of an Asian worm. The sacred record was written in Reformed Egyptian and contained Arabic words. The English word silk comes from the Arabic word silk, which means in Arabic dialect any thread or wire. The Peruvians were the master weavers of the ancient world. The Spanish historian Cesar de Leon wrote that the Indians could weave as good a tapestry as any woven in Flanders from the wool of their flocks, and so fine a weave that it seemed of silk rather than of wool. The Peruvians also cultivated cotton and had some very exotic forms of cloth. When the Spanish captured the Inca king, they were amazed at the softness of his clothes. When they asked him from what it was made of, the Inca told them it was woven from the fur of bats.